Hey students, it's Mrs. T. Welcome to another fun lesson of geography where we get to dive deeper into the 5 themes of geography that you will find in your textbook. Please make sure you look on Blackboard for the specific pages from the 12th edition that are required for you to read this week as we get the rest of the information that we need so that you can ace your first project, which is also in Blackboard. Look for a Project 1 folder someplace in between the Week 2 and Week 3 folders themselves. So it'll have, you need really good notes from these videos that, from Week 2 videos and from the videos in the Week 3 folder in order to do well and excel on Project 1, where I'm going to ask you to apply your knowledge about the 5 themes of geography to a different little video story, you have your choice of 3 different videos that you can look at about geography topics. Believe it or not, they are geography topics, and ask you to apply, pick them apart kind of, and find some examples from each of the videos that fit these 5 themes of geography. So make sure you got your notes open and let's start taking some notes and finding out some information about these 5 themes. Now remember, the order that these appear is just to follow the Mr. Help acronym. In your textbook, you're going to read about them in a different order, but it's still the 5 themes of geography. So let's talk about movement first. Now movement is a theme of geography because we have people, ideas, and information that don't just stay stationary or one place. We aren't planted in one place. We can move around across the landscape ourselves. And this movement enables ideas, people, goods, and information to travel from one place to the next. Now, one of the key vocabulary words for this introductory chapter in geography is a cultural hearth. Now, a culture is the collection of ideas and information, customs, beliefs, traditions, holidays, these kinds of things, movement patterns. These are all a collection of parts of human behavior that are considered culture. And typically in geography, we talk about cultural hearths, or a center point where a particular idea, a particular bit of information, a custom, an item, something within, a physical part of the culture or tangible culture, like an invention, originates, and then knowledge about how to use that particular part of culture spreads from that location around the world. So for instance, hip hop is a music movement. It's a social movement, actually, that originated in 2 different locations in the United States. And it was really, the movement itself initially was really about empowering traditionally disadvantaged people. But that concept of hip hop and what the social statements were that those original hip hop artists spread throughout their fan base first, their fandom, actually spread throughout the world now. And you have a lot of hip hop movements of their own. They've been re-territorialized, to use a verb or a noun that we are going to look at more carefully later in the semester. They've been appropriated through cultural assimilation in different areas of the world. And you have hip hop in Tunisia, hip hop in Tibet, hip hop all over the world, and the topics that typically people rhyme about or do graffiti to highlight, these topics tend to cover significant social issues in that particular location. And so these ideas have to start someplace. They originate someplace in the minds of human beings, and these ideas move as people move or as telecommunication systems enable those things to move. You've got, these pictures of trains and planes, and there's no automobile here, but let's look at the next slide where I've got a question for you. Let me move myself out of the way of the question. I've got a question for you about The fact that, number one, you need to know and put it predominantly in your notes, that each of these different 5 themes of geography, they don't stand alone. They're twisted and entwined with each other, and so they are connected with each other. And so this cartoon image that I have of, you should see the curvature of the earth there with some lines going across the earth that we will talk about in just a second because they relate to another one of the 5 themes of geography. And actually 2 other 5 themes of geography. These cell phone towers that enable us to spread ideas and information and communication from one location to the next, there's one of those things. These cell phone towers are a way that we interact with our environment, human interaction with the environment, in order to make that kind of communication possible. And for those of you who are only just now in your 20s, you pretty much have always lived in the era of cell phones being very, very common. However, it's only really been within the last 10 years or so where these cell phone towers we've been able to use satellites to bounce off information and incorporate it into the cell network. But also there have historically been like dead zones because of geographic features, maybe mountains, maybe a valley, and you have to make sure that these cell towers are in clear shot of each other so that you get that possibility of movement of voice, of ideas from one place to the next. So there's a lot of overlap here, at least with location, because you certainly have, which is another theme of geography, because you certainly do have to plan the location of these towers very carefully so that you don't have any of these dead zones. And you also have to prep things and anticipate what kind of climate or what kind of weather systems typically happen in that particular place, which are characteristics of place, so that you can interact with the environment to make sure that your cell phone tower lasts. And I'm just using cell phone towers as an example here because this picture came up quickly when I was searching for some examples, and I thought, okay, this is a good way to see how all of these different elements of Mr. Help overlap with each other. So that's one important thing that you're going to be asked to identify in Project 1 is not only just isolated examples of movement or region, which is next, or human and environment interaction, but also how are they connected? Where is their overlap among these 5 themes of geography when we're asking ourselves, why of where? And so this is movement. I think we have time in this video to go to one more element of geography, and that is one of the themes of geography, and that is regions. And so let's look at regions quickly before my 15-minute limit is out on this video. So the R of Mr. Help is regions, and regions are important for a geographer because they tend to create mental regions, mental scapes about different, the relationship one place has to the next place. And so we distinguish regions into 3 different categories in geography. And so when you are thinking of a region, you always have to ask yourself, what kind of region are we talking about? I believe we mentioned the Bible Belt in a previous video, and the Bible Belt is a perceptual region, this last one on the list here. It's a perceptual region that is grouped together different places that have geopolitical borders. When you think of the shape of the state of Arkansas, that line that you see in your mind around that particular piece of land did not always exist. We can look at a shape of the Louisiana Purchase, and there's a huge chunk of what's now known as the United States that was purchased during the Louisiana acquisition. And Arkansas was carved out of that shape over time, along with other states. And so why? And those kinds of questions can be answered by looking at the 5 themes of geography and overlapping knowledge that we have of history, politics, and disputes in some cases to figure out how did one region become a formal region such as that shape of Arkansas. But Arkansas is part of something called the Bible Belt, which is a perceptual region of places in the USA where religious behavior is a dominant characteristic of the people who live in those places. And depending upon who draws the map for the Bible Belt, you'll see lots of different regions of different states, maybe some states cut apart to fit in these different perceptual regions that we develop in our mind. Okay, and so back to that cell phone map that we looked a minute ago, let's talk about functional regions also. Functional regions could include that cell tower range, the cell phone coverage area like we have here. Here's an old thing, newspaper service area, for anybody who's an old timer like me and remembers when paper routes were a thing. A bus route that picks up, kids and takes them and drops them off at school, or even within a city. The trolleys that exist in downtown Little Rock, they have a functional region where they operate. And outside that region, you're on foot or some kind of other mode of transportation. So these regions, if I ask you, which I will in Project 1, to identify a region, you have three options. And to explain what a region is, you would need to include an explanation of these three different types of regions. A formal region, which has geopolitical borders. It has a mayor for a town, or it has a governor for a state, those kinds of things. Or there's some kind of like legal system that for the Corn Belt, for instance, or the Rocky Mountain region, there are water districts that exist, or farming regulations that group different areas into political units that aren't necessarily on the average map. And so these formal regions are a part of region, but we also have the functional area that something serves. Are you inside or outside the Walmart grocery delivery service area, right? So these are functional regions, and then also perceptual regions. What exists in our minds about what belongs to whom, or what culture is dominant someplace. And this next slide that I'm going to show you is one of these formalized maps that takes perceptual regions for one particular author in the Business Insider recently. This author proposed that the United States is really not a United States because there's so many different cultures that are dominant from one region to the next. And so these are perceptual regions in his mind. And if you'll see our state of Arkansas down here, you've got the little grayed outline where the actual geopolitical border exists. But this author claims or proposes that part of Arkansas is in the Deep South, what he calls the Deep South, and part of it is in something that he calls Greater Appalachia. And there's a tidewater area over here. These are his perceptual names for these perceptual regions that he has identified on the map. And he claims that people in these different areas along the West Coast, for instance, or up here in what he calls Yankeedom, his word for this particular region, have different ways of life, different attitudes, different beliefs, definitely different accents and words that are specific to their daily vocabulary. And so he came up with this concept and proposed it in a Business Insider article recently. So I wanted to share that map with you to explain how perceptual regions work. Okay, so we've looked at movement and region, the Mr. of Mr. Help. So let's look at the rest of Mr. Help. Maybe I can get it all into one video in our next lesson. Thank you for watching. See you next time.